This is the Mindset Game podcast, and today's guest I've got Andy Lane. So welcome on the show, Andy.
Welcome, James.
So can you give a brief introduction to who you are and what you do?
Brief. Not known for being brief. I'm a professor of sport and exercise psychology at the University of Wolverhampton. I've been there since 2000. Prior to that, I was at Brunel University, where I did all my degrees, an undergraduate in sports studies, right the way through to a part-time master's, which was the only part-time master's in the early 1990s. Then I did a PhD at Brunel, supervised by Peter Terry. I'm BASES accredited for research, sport and exercise science chartered, BPS chartered, BPS examiner. So I've got a lot in terms of qualifications. That's not a boast, but a function of that. In the past, from 1988 when I started my degree to where I are now, 30 years, I've kept on board, keeping the qualifications relevant. I think all those qualifications are worth keeping up to date. They may not have the punch in terms of getting your job that you might want them to do for people looking at trying to attain them now, but they are certainly worthwhile doing in terms of your own professional development. My current job is I'm the director of our research area at the University of Wolverhampton. Quite a lot of senior positions in terms of strategy, supervise a whole load of PhD students, teach on undergraduate courses, more. I come in and give specialist lectures across quite a few courses. I couldn't actually say which ones altogether. In the research methods, I come and offer some words of wisdom about the exciting, you're nodding your head, the exciting possibilities that statistics can bring to the question of unravelling what goes on in the world, right the way through to the excitement in terms of developing research questions, trying to say what they actually mean in reality. I never said I could do it briefly, but that is a rough summary of what I've been doing.
Thanks for that introduction, Andy. Well, I only shake my head because that's probably my bad experience with research methods. I wasn't a big fan of it when I was at university, but like you say, it teaches you the statistics, and you also need it to do your coursework. So it's not.
I mean, right from the start, as a practitioner, as a researcher, in essence, have a scientific approach. You're trying to look for consistencies. You're trying to set up hypotheses, and hypotheses delimit where you're going. Is that we think if an athlete's got issues with nerves, we are saying, well, issues with nerves. If we address that, we're going to get certain outcomes. We are delimiting our work based on our evidence. The reason we have to be really good at research methods is we have to be able to sort out what is good data from poor data, what studies which are where the evidence is well supported by the numbers that are generated, where the numbers that are generated by the methods that are used, whether questionnaires, whether observation, whether physiological, direct physiological measurements. We really have to know what they mean. We really have to look at how that data is collected, where it's collected, all the social issues. It is a really difficult job to do that and do it well. So getting your knowledge on research methods really good is the dirty job. It's the uninteresting job, but it's one of the most worthwhile things that anyone can do in their development, because so many. God, I look at on the JS Journal of Sports Sciences. I'm the editor for Psych in that. So many papers are rejected in essence because they're poor methodology. They're not they're not presenting good arguments for the defence of why we did this, what we could have done, what are the threats to our reliability, validity, and it's just sort of. So we'll use this questionnaire because everyone else has done, therefore it's fine. Right, okay, but let's put our head in the sand, let's be an ostrich, bury ourselves from the possibilities that someone might look at this questionnaire and go, God dear, those numbers aren't giving me what I need. Or those numbers are different to the reality of what we're trying to study.
Is it a basis that some people aren't questioning, going about, say, just kind of not questioning why they got those results, and just following a trend that, or if that sort of questionnaire worked for somebody else, it should work for mine, as opposed to questioning it. Well, if I've got these results, but that study got something else, why is that the case?
It's a bit of both, isn't it? But look, I think one of the reasons we don't get into research methods is not the interesting question. It's not our interest is if it's how do we get people to perform better? How do we get people to stick to exercise for longer? That's the tool we're going to use. The torturous reading regarding whether the validation article that used a clever statistic, which takes 3 days to try and work out what one number means, we then go, oh, how can we shortcut that? We don't do that deliberately, but it isn't the key driver. We accept that that's been used lots of times. It's been okay for them to use it. We accept it, but our main search area of interest is something else. Easily skip over it. And what student is going to be inspired to say, oh, we could really do with a new measure of this? Really? Where do we start from that? Or you're likely to be reading a lot about how to look at reliability. Okay. And it's not as exciting as someone saying, let's look at an intervention to make people more confident. Can you introspect on your own experiences, because that'll give you some insight into why your confidence was a bit fragile in places. That's a good starting point, and that's an exciting bit of research rather than going, actually, let's look at what reliability is. But if we then want to measure, we want some science behind it, then we're going to need a really good tool, and we struggle. So it's not exciting work, but it is something it's ongoing and it's difficult, and it's something that we all should be. I don't think we're going to get it right. I just think we should be really happy to challenge ourselves to say, actually, the portion of error that went on in that study is probably a good is a large factor that could explain some of the results, because we get some results that go really well. We love it, and it might well be for one reason to do with some social factor that was going on within there.
Oh, it's just one of those. But then coming back to the point when you say error, I think for people outside of the academic field, they probably be horrified to some extent with how well, that's probably why I look at polls nowadays in a different light, because with science, it's to have a perfect study, was it between 95 and 99%, isn't it? And to be a positive test, if I remember rightly. And if you put that into the real world, say for politics, for just as an example, isn't their poll being manipulative, because that's not 100% poll to start with, and how far are you actually going relative to that poll, the actual sample size, to get the numbers?
Of course. I mean, but part of that, the big point of that is our interpretation of the data and how much we emphasise it. And it's easy to get carried away and try to make big, bold claims. But your claims should only be couched in your data, and the acceptance that the data may not be as good as what you think it is. The statistical significance is a very easy thing to get, and it's very easy to get anything to work. And our study with the BBC, Can You Compete, 50, depending on how you look, depending on which, all of the data, it's 100,000 people completed an online experiment to investigate the effects of sport and exercise psychology interventions, compare and contrast them. Absolutely everything is statistically significant. So when SPSS flies results out, there are no significance equals 0.0000 to the default.
Mm-hmm.
You can find out what the exact number is. You can click into that, and it keeps racing away. Right. So whatever the relationship is, it's significant. Right? There's one or two that aren't significant, which are quite remarkable because they're not significant. But you read studies where they took a statistical significance without talking about how big the difference was, how strong the relationship was, and you go, must be significant. That must be good then. Our undergraduates, I sit with them, so they look for significance. Their eyes light up when it's statistically significant, as if you're brought out and said, it's a boy, it's a son. There you go. Oh, I've got a baby. I've done something well. It isn't so important. It's the size of the effect which is much more important, and whether the effect is significant or not can be so easy to be manipulated. If you don't do a power calculation, which is sometimes very difficult, and to gather the supposed estimated size, and you just go, I'll tell you what we'll do is we will go out and get a big sample. You'll always get significance. Scared students, undergraduates, where the system isn't really so robust and nail them down to get power and get into all that discussion. Because it's very difficult to estimate the power when you don't know what the likely effect size is. Just go out and get a large sample. Everything will come out significant. The ease in which they can say the study worked for their undergraduate goes up massively. Makes them happy in a sense that supports what they want to find. But it doesn't make it good research. And you ramp that up a few levels in journals, you get quite a few studies which have come out where the findings are a little bit unclear, and authors are quite offering very very powerful messages on significance. So when they come to JSS under my editorship, we tell them we want to know what the result was, we want to know what the effect size is, we want to know what the practical reality is. What we want is, and we bring this back down, is that if this was you, and you are about to go, and I'm supporting you as an athlete, and I'm your psychologist, I'm looking for some evidence from the literature. I want to know if anything is any good. I don't want it to be statistically significant with a 1% better, 1% variation, because we could have a conversation, and you could say, "I'll tell you what, I perform really well." It's not you, but I perform really well when I wear my lucky socks. Erroneous beliefs regarding other factors can have powerful influences. You want your science to have a big effect. You want your science to have a meaningful effect, and you want to look into you want to be guided by the literature, and you want that literature to offer something a little bit better than lucky socks. A good effect and a good explanation as to why.
So does it harpen back to, well, you should want to challenge the current literature that's out there, and obviously to enhance it so that out in the real world, people are actually making progress from it and actually getting something from it. Is that what you can take from that?
I started doing my research with anxiety in 1994. Our undergraduates aren't born there now, so that it does really make me feel old. We've collected data on duathletes and triathletes, and we used the CSIA2 with the directional scale. And we went out prior to a race, and we handed these questionnaires out. And the direction, people would just look at that directional scale, and they'd offer some struggle. They would struggle with what they would want. So lots of people said, "What on this bit here? What does that mean? On this bit here, what does that mean?" So you've got a method issue that's going on there. That simply because they're asking, there's an interpretation of what should be happening. And you go, yeah, and several hours of these sorts of questions is quite tiring for the researcher to collecting the data, suggesting that there's an issue here. Intuitively, you know that people, when they feel anxious, think that that's not necessarily a bad thing. That's not. Some people do, other people don't. But the concept is really good, but the measurement of that is really difficult in that sense, because I'm as the researcher, having trouble getting numbers back from people. They're telling me they're having troubles filling out that questionnaire. So it suggests that there's something going on with that. That in itself should raise raise alarm bells to me, in a sense that, what actually am I getting from this process in terms of people completing this questionnaire, as to how many people really understand what's been asked of them, How much junk data am I getting from people who are uncertain? Quite a few people would put naught down for everything. So in other words, the process of asking the question was causing a bit of an issue. I would really you had Steve Mellion on previous guest. Steve and I had a great debate in one of that literature on that. It's quite, if you want to read, it's really good debate because we polarise our arguments as to where we're going, and I think that came out in the noughties, early, a few years long. But we really polarise our arguments, which is good for debates, rather than very early on agreeing with each other and sort of picking at the edges. We polarise each argument each time and go, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. But it is from my experiences of that is to go, actually, we really do. In '95 did come up with the idea that I need to understand about how questionnaires are put together. If we're using questionnaires, what is the process through which somebody tries to introspect their inner experiences before they come up with a number, so that as I'm feeling, do I know am I concerned about this competition? Right? So prior to being presented with that question, had I thought about that as a concept? And now you've asked me, how do I then feel about it? Now the prompting of that question, has that changed my perception of those emails aren't flashing on the screen, are they?
No.
Okay, good. They just whooshed across the top. Has that changed the perception of me as me going into that environment? Because in other words, has the researcher got an effect? That's a really important issue. The effect of the social part of collecting the data, does that have an effect on the data you bring back? And we've looked at in other studies we've looked at doing bits of that, and our research in emotion is all, it relies quite heavily on self-report. So getting that bit right getting that bit as best right as possible is quite important. Later on in our research, we've tried to look at measures of within competition or within performance emotions, and that raises the issue of, if you ask somebody how angry you are, what is that prompting them to regulate that anger when they say 7 out of 7? Because the point of you saying I'm really angry actually then prompts you to say, do I want to be really angry? And all of those processes will occur in non-consciously, immediately at the point of being questioned. Go.
So from that, do you think that the certain question somebody asks manipulates the answer you're going to get?
Of course it does. It primes it, doesn't it? It primes the answer. So, and then there's the how it's been asked also primes the answer. Then it's the thoughts of the audience to what the receiver is going to have in terms, if the research is done in an area and I ask students and I prime the students and I tell them all about my work and they think my work's great, and then I start doing research into it, they have been primed positively to respond to this, that it's worthwhile doing. If nothing else, if they give me really honest answers, I've at least encouraged them to do worthwhile research, which I think is really important in terms of, or it is really important because we want most of those. It's really difficult to detect when someone is just taking part in your study with no interest in the questions, because you're not going to easily tease them out. And if they can give extreme scores and biased results massively, or they can go, or not, but it complicates the science. It complicates the science.
And is there a way of not getting that bias by asking certain how would you go about not getting a bias in that way then, by obviously the question you ask?
I think you just accept the bias. I think you accept there's always some degree of bias, and then you can do studies to try and overcome those. But then we get into the difficulties of setting the study up, don't we? The BBC study, we had Michael Johnson providing the interventions, which is great. This is really great, isn't it? That you write interventions and Michael Johnson narrates them and we had to work with it. We worked with the BBC to these things like self-talk, and we then present the narrative to Michael Johnson, who came over, who does the acting to film them. there's a point where he reads it where your credibility as the practitioner is questioned, because Michael's going to read it and go, or could go, no one would say that. Didn't, but there is. I mean, when we set up studies or we offer intervention work, there is a part where, as you suggest something, the feedback on it as to whether it gives you really difficult time creates some degree of emotional response from you as the researcher practitioner. It's thinking through how you can minimise that and how you can control for it and account for it. In our BBC study, for example, the control group, which is a group that just gets Michael just saying pretty bland stuff, think that was brilliant information. We didn't tell them they're in the control group; they just landed into it. So, but what you've got very nicely is that people who join up for interventions that where it works, where they think it's going to work, tends to work. It's some nice work. I mean, we did another study with the magazine Runner's World, where we signed same kind of thing, sign people up for an intervention based on an online intervention, which the online intervention is quite good because it standardises delivery, which is one thing I quite like about the Michael Johnson one. Every single person got the same length of intervention. It was delivered in exactly the same way because they all watched the same videos. Everyone with one condition got the same videos, and therefore we can standardise what the individual received, which we can't do when it's done we can't do it that way. Can't always do it that way unless people are delivered the intervention all at the same time. But there was a degree of standardisation that makes that quite well. And there's also in online interventions you can standardise it because everyone's looking at the same film, same bit of footing, which makes it therefore quite useful. So there is a way, so that gives you an insight into how your methods could then be biasing or influencing your results. But I think the researcher and practitioner's got to go in thinking, well, hold on, how is the questions influencing the responses we're going to get back? And it becomes really enlightening for me as a researcher and practitioner, enlightening to try and guess how that's going to occur, and then try and hypothesize as to why, and then see if you can either offer a way of interpreting the data in the way that it's presented, or trying to change the data so that you collect different data. I'll give you a good example of that. Is that we've used a scale called the Brunel mood scale in thousands and thousands and thousands of studies, and I got into that because when my wife did her MSc, I was her data collection helper. So I was the person who handed out the felt tip pens, collected the questionnaires back, and I handed them out. We collected hundreds of these, hundreds if not thousands of these over a couple of days at the London Youth Games, but also 94. And people completed this with real ease. So I thought this is great questionnaire. Then when I started using it to predict performance as part of my PhD in the early 90s, I was going on depression. And I was trying to make sense of the profile of mood states scales, why they should be influential in this notional iceberg, which was always a bit questionable. Really try to go, actually, why do they... And so I started looking at them, vigour, feeling energetic, that should be positive. If you're energetic, feel alert, excited, that should be a good thing to feel. And detention, that's anxiety. Some people, do well on tension, other people don't do well, understand all that. All the directional anxiety stuff provides real insight into what's going on in there in terms of people's mind, really good. Depression, you go, what's depression as a mood state, as an emotional state? Feelings of loss, feelings of hopelessness, feelings of sadness, feelings of dejected, low activation states. Well, what's that good for? What's that good for? Surely if someone is feeling dejected, surely that's not going to be a motivated state. So you go, okay, well, that's the hypothesis. You then look at the literature and you go, God, there's a lot of studies that show no effect. What's going on here then? Is it that some people find feeling dejected quite motivating? Right. At the time, I thought, unlikely. So I then started with our data sets looking at the depression scale and looked at how that was scored. It was typically low, as you'd expect. Athletes prior to competition, athletes prior to it. Most people, most of the time, are not feeling very depressed. when I started looking at it in greater detail, I found that most people, over 50%, put 0 for everything. Okay, well that makes sense because they're not feeling really depressed. And then another great proportion of people put only 1 or more. So I said, okay, well, I wonder if there are much differences between people who put 0 and 1. Right? And just started looking at the data that way. And the differences in all the other mood states, emotional states, was colossal. So from a 0-1 honest questionnaire from 0 to 16 with 4 items, so you have 4 opportunities to put more than 1. Where you put 1 down on one of those scales, you get a massive difference in the other emotional states, which to me suggests that people are hiding their depression. So when presented with, do you feel downhearted, they will look at that and be fully aware of the consequences of putting anything high on it, and then just putting 0. Where they put 1 down, we then get to feel that they're confused, fatigued, tired, not feeling vigorous, and the effect sizes for those differences are really high. So in other studies, what we've done later on is we thought, actually, waiting for someone to feel depressed, dejected is not a good state. And we did this we worked with the GB biathlon team as we took them to altitude, and we were testing, because altitude makes people feel knackered really early. It's not a good thing. So we wanted to intercept really early on when they're at a training camp to stop them feeling really sort of a negative emotional state. So we brought in happiness scales. That was quite good because you get a full range of happiness, and the idea that happiness deteriorates before depression kicks off is quite a useful way within a subject to try and detect when depression when people put 0 down for happiness. We often have a couple of days of 0, 0 for depression and happiness, and then depression would kick off. So we started getting some methods for within variation emotional states to detecting when people start getting knackered as a poor response to training. If you're not acclimatising to altitude, everything feels exhausting. I wish I had someone bringing me a cup of tea as well. I haven't got that.
So why do people look to hide that emphasis of depression?
The idea, whether it's something to do with an expectation of how we should feel. So we're quite, the media will talk about, within the media, confidence being a really key factor, feeling really positive. Interviews with athletes, it's all about being confident. The idea that you need to be very efficacious as an athlete goes back to Muhammad Ali with his proclaimed statement of the greatest, the acting confident prior to competition. When have you ever heard prior to a sports event the athlete been interviewed and said, actually, I feel rubbish today. I'm going to go out there and it's going to be no better than average. Right? It's going to be no better than average. All of a sudden they go, yeah, I feel good. So they self-present to them a way that is positive. Now, whether in front of the media camera gives you a clear idea of who the audience was, and therefore, as that camera comes, or your agreement to do it, the process of just thinking what you're going to say starts. And it's unlikely to be deliberate, but it's likely to be, well, this is how I want to be presented. In a research-based questionnaire, the prompting of that, I think people just want to. There's a little bit of I am not ready to open out the full works of my negativity.
Okay, well that's quite interesting, and like you said, between 0 and 1, you could probably say to a little degree that is probably higher up the scale. It's probably some people that are not shying away from it to a certain extent, but they don't want to show their true selves. That probably something that would probably be to some degree true.
I think so. And I think that within the context of prior to sport, I think your competition heads on. It's the last thing you want to be admitting to. So you are actually trying to psych yourself up. You're actually aware of the negative potential, sometimes negative feelings or unpleasant feelings, more likely physiological feelings related to excessive needs to go to the toilet, which is most athletes, which start questioning whether you're going to feel right, which start questioning whether you're going to feel right when the competition starts. And therefore, it's not a deliberate biasing act, but it is part of a process which people are not necessarily going to give the best answer. When you work with someone for a long period of time, you see that how they respond to questionnaire scores differs. So that 0, 0, 1 works well with people who are quite new to that questionnaire. When people have been doing it for a long period of time, you have feedback to them. So when someone presents, you have a conversation about their mood profile, and as they get used to it, they will then go, actually, I need a bit of variation here, because what you said, I was feeling a bit low. It's not deliberate encouragement to have to complete it differently, but they start, the trust between you and the person increases, and therefore they open up a bit more with their questionnaires. The 0, 1 doesn't occur so much when you know someone a great period of time. Because they've worked out the process of opening up, of using this, permits what allows people to want to use the scale. I mean, I'll tell you a really good example of this is when we've done work on emotional intelligence, coping, where people can you cope with difficult situations, and you go up to people in groups and very high scores. They then put them on an intervention, which the intervention typically makes them aware of their skills, strategies, how effective they have coped in those situations. There's awareness raising. In essence, they've given themselves nowhere to go by being top of the scale to start with. You then put them through experiences which are designed to make them question themselves. They often don't get any better. On the scale as a marker of effectiveness is poor in that regard, because they've got nowhere to go, because they're 8 or 9 or 7, 8, 9 or 10 on the scale. They're either 8, 9 or 10. Really, they will reflect later on, saying, "I wish I'd have put 7 down, and now I'm 8, because actually I realised I wasn't so good. I've got quite a bit better, but I'm now an 8, and I truly rate myself as an 8. I just got 9 on at the start." And that's the qualitative bit on the post-evaluation intervention work that comes out, but the numbers on the scales don't allow that.
So from a personal experience, for things like that, is it better to be more, to some degree, negative when you're looking at, say, be a bit more, not negative in a way, but what's the word I'm trying to think of? Think you're lower, then obviously there's a bit more room to improve, as opposed to thinking, well, I'm this, or I think I'm better at this, and you actually, if you were analysed from outside looking in, you're probably not as good as you think you are.
Yeah, let's put so you're an athlete in a training camp. Pum pops along, gives you a questionnaire on, and it's in essence how mentally tough you are. All right, so we're going to put you on a mental toughness training program. We're going to get this baseline data now. Be as honest as possible. You look at the questions, and you go, "Oh dear." Do you think they might be selecting off this? Do you think they might want to know who's going to be, because we're going to budget who's going to be really tough? Do you think that looking around, other people are going to put low scores for this? All of this will occur non-consciously in a social environment where you're set with other people, or you start, and not consciously, but you'll be aware that you're about to engage in a dialogue, which if you put 1 out of 10 down, not mentally tough, scared to do all this, don't want to do this, that's not going to trigger someone to go, well, is that person really set for our sport, where we're about to put them under real stress? So they may want to put higher scores as a basis of self-protection, or, and I think this is also totally true, is that they don't know. The part that you put them on an education program to make them aware, that they go, I thought I had strategies to cope with these difficult scenarios, and I don't. my strategies were not as good as I thought they were, and therefore I wasn't as high as I thought I was. And now that I've got better strategies, now that the strategies I've got I can use, and they work better, then I feel more self-confident. I feel more resilient. I feel more mentally tough, because when I get into a situation which is putting me under pressure, I know what to do and how to do it.
And what sort of strategies could you put in place to help would help you to deal with emotions?
The model we've been looking at is an interesting discussion with resilience, mental toughness, coping, emotion regulation. I think the best model is one of proactive coping, where you go, okay, well, what is the challenge you're about to go and do? And so from that challenge, you go, what resources will I or could I require if this challenge goes all wrong? So what resources shall I get with me ready? Either real resources or ones that are psychological skills. Identify those, practice those, and then they go in the tool bag with you. The lovely example is where we work with a female solo explorer to the South and North Pole. And the interview, we did an interview which talked about her coping strategies. So it's so inspiring, because you've got this quite small, physically small person whose mental mountain in terms of her mental toughness to overcome, as she talks about death-ending scenarios of fear, of the environment cracking around, and then how she copes with those potentially difficult challenges and anticipated them, and how she was and had really clear strategies for doing that. A simple one, really simple one, is that she knew she had to get her tent up and she had to get her gas fire up. It's minus 30, and you know that you haven't got very long before you will stop generating heat from movement, before you need to get everything warmed up, before you have to get setting up. But you know that in order to get your gas fire up and your tent up, you have to take the outer thick layer of gloves off. And you know that as you take the outer thick layer of gloves off, it's going to be really cold. And then within that next period, you've got to absolutely trust your ability to do those next series of tasks. So the gloves come off, you realise that it's going to be really cold, really difficult. The anxiety of that if you don't do this next task in a certain amount of time, frostbite will kick in, and that's disastrous. So you break that down, work that down. Behaviourally, they're really good at the task you're going to do, so you're really confident in doing it. And therefore, that challenge, which is life-threatening, limb-threatening, very difficult at the point when you're about to doing it, because you go into that task tired, because it's going to come near the end of the day, cold, because it's starting to get really cold. So you need to be psychologically up for it in a physiologically really difficult state. So you build up the resources ready to get into that by practicing at the specific skills and being able to do that really, really tidily. But what's happened there is we've identified the demands of the task in ice and then built little strategies in so each one's overcome. So that you're a good coper around those different situations. In that case study, some really nice parts, which is also about social support, which is really good. Which, in terms of some of the current media regarding athletes coming out with indicating depression. Ricky Hatton really nicely the other day talked about nicely because it showcases that even the toughest struggle with these. His inner demons with depression, his inner demons with self-harm. He's a really tough man who goes in with Costa Zoo, takes hard punches, but his own inner thoughts tear him apart. He's in a sport where mental toughness about you take it on, you're the champion, you're the best, it's all around there. The presenting yourself in that confident way is all about that sport, as it is in many sports. By him coming out with that and saying, I really struggled with that, I think it opens up what is a massive gap in our ability to support athletes, is the need for that social connection. It's when the elite athlete or any person realises that their own coping skills, or to cope, social support is absolutely vital. And to know how to use those social support skills, how to know them, and to draw on them, and absolutely no way see that asking for help or sharing your problem or however way you do that is seen as a weakness. So I think that's really important.
But does it come back to more so from the male perspective of this outlook of the male bravado? I want to be seen as tough and not obviously depression and whatnot is just looked badly upon.
It's possibly, but it's certainly something to be. It's something to be aware of, and something to. So actually, are there gender issues? I mean, that's a good research question, isn't it? Is there a big gender differences that goes on that male athletes are particularly vulnerable to that? We absolutely know that young males, 19 to 25, the biggest cause of death is suicide. So we absolutely know they're a group at risk, and so within how males are brought up, the need for the encouragement for general programs in schools to encourage people to be able to ask for support or to be able to use support that's available. Because you may not need to asking for it is one thing. Actually going and using it is another matter. There's been also a growth in online support in clinical psych which allows people to access services. And I know some people, when you suggest that, because we've suggested in sports psych with our Michael Johnson work and our Runners World stuff, we think that online support, I think online support's really good because people can dip in and out however much they want. They can self-regulate regarding, you want training environments online for people to have lots of goes at it, which I think is really good. People to be able to go and do this training online and be really badly at it and not worry about it because there's not someone watching you do it. So if you have to go to see someone and do something in someone else, there's an anxiety about how badly you are at that. Which if you anticipate that, will mean that you won't actually engage with the practice to begin with. If you think someone's watching you, judging you, you won't want to, and you don't think you can do very well. It's an encouragement not to do it. So the potential is that males will struggle with that. With our Explorer, it was interesting, and we did this with male athletes on a ride across America. Is that she couldn't cope with information back home about how family were whilst on the Explorer trip. It had to be contained to only be the exploration. So the social support part, that you get yourself in a mindset of coping with that fierce environment, to hear about how your family are getting on, was information which was too stressful. So there's quite a lot of work in terms of how the supporters can help with athletes in terms of their gaining social support. Because often certainly when I worked with a professional boxer, we got a lot of. This was interesting. Is that we got lots of well-wishers, family, friends coming up to the boxer quite close to the competition, going, "Go on, you can do this. Go on, you can do this." And it was quite, "Go on, you can knock him out." That sort of thing. All great, all motivating, inspiring, all arousing. The first couple of fights, they had quite a bit of access to him going in, and you thought, crikey, this is changing our tactic. We've just spent 2 months on a tactic against this opponent, and he's getting information which is counter to the emotional state we want at the start, counter to the mindset we want at the start. It's really and we're not certain that he needs that building up because he wants to be calm. He said he wants to be calm. It's what they need to do. All those friends and family want to wish well, want to provide that sort of support. So it's for their emotional regulation, not his, that they're doing it for. But they are arguing it's for theirs, I'm going to go and cheer. I need to go and wish him well. But actually, it's a massive about their cheering there, making them feel good about themselves because they've contributed to that process. So there's two parts. One is the encouraging the athlete and the individual to know how to access help, whether that's to do something they do themselves or people they go to speak to. And then there's a massive amount of work to do on how people in their local support groups can actually help the athlete. Because sometimes it doesn't have to be much. Lovely one on the ride across America, where one of the riders is feeling really down. All the support guy did is just made him a cup of tea. Made him a cup of tea and says, almost, it's okay to feel shit. It's okay. You don't have to be pumped up all the time. It's okay to feel really to be down. Just spend a bit of time. And there's quite a lot. They'd come in and there'd be lots of. How'd you feel? That's great. Pumping up all the time. All quite good, but all quite tiring. All quite tiring. The actual trying to keep the environment quite positive. Quite a lot of the stresses and strains of trying to keep people on tours. So really, in other words, what the athlete needed, he recognised what he needed. He got from a very experienced practitioner who didn't do very much. But the experienced practitioner realised didn't need to do very much because not a lot was needed. Which, in other words, that person got that right without having to do a lot.
So it comes back to the basis of treating each individual. Treating each individual individualistic as to how they deal with its different situations.
Certainly on a consultancy level, then you need to as you push on towards competition, each person's going to require different things. There's certain general things that are good practice that you can apply. Certainly understanding that environment of what works well for individuals helps. Certainly in soccer, in football, as an example, some players like it calm before the game. Others like to smash around and get trash around. The simple intervention is to get the calm ones sitting near each other, and get the loud ones sitting near each other. Because you put the calm one next to the noisy one, and it's just stressful. You put for the noisy one, the calm one is sending the signal that you don't care, because his method of interpreting or her method of interpreting how we get up for a game is rousing everyone up. The organisational shift doesn't have to be massive in terms of making a big difference, but just recognising that other people affect each other's emotions. I've done that with runners when they warm up, when they've warmed up, and they come up and you've got back to them and they go, "You're right." You can see something, they're not very confident. And they've gone and warmed up with a group of people or near a group of people. And all one has to say, "Oh, you're looking really good today. You're probably going to win." And you think, "Oh, crikey." Just like the boxer, someone has shifted that mindset, put a thought into their mind really late on, at a point when they're quite emotional. And it's sent off a dialogue of thoughts which are not the way we want to go. Solution to that is to not warm up with that group. Very simple. You stop the damage going from others. The emotions being translated, different thoughts being translated. So it can be quite simple. But everyone warms up at the same time. Everyone's doing the same drills. That group are doing them together, and that one isn't.
So if you had to wrap it all up, the whole podcast, into like a simple sentence so somebody can take it home, what solutions would you say for people to do to be able to deal with emotions?
What I would say is, as practitioners, as athletes, is to get a real understanding of what emotions you're feeling. So if you are, and I think most people who are studying sports psychology or practicing should do not studies on themselves to publish, but should take part, should go, okay, I'm going to fill out this questionnaire and I'm going to see how it relates to my performance. So really, it's the first thing to do is get a really good understanding of how they complete these questionnaires or gather the measures that they use, whether it's heart rate, variability. So how do I interpret that? And what do I believe the results I'm getting? Can I offer counter explanations? Are my inner stories, inner thoughts, feelings being captured enough to give that useful information? Because that's the starting point. Because if you are working with someone, whether they write a 7 down on a scale, 3 down on a scale, or give you a sentence, what you're absolutely relying on them is to be able to articulate what's going on inside. Right? Whether it's because questionnaires get bashed, but someone's got to be able to get access to that process really well. So the first thing is to do is how well can you get access to that information? So, and which is the first part, and from that is you can then work out what you want to do with it. And for many cases, in terms of our own emotions, once we've realised what the intensities are and why we feel in those, we can then start thinking, well, the first thing is, what did I do, or what have I done previously to change how I feel so I felt better, in however I define better? And is that a constant reoccurring theme in my life? So, where I felt really anxious and anxiety was really negative, what went on in those situations, and look for common occurrences. And what you'll get from that is insight into the inner process of psychological measurement, and how to judge from that, and how even you as the person completing it, trying to be as honest as possible, will recognise your own biases and your own judgments of, why didn't I put a 7 down and an 8? Why have I said I'm 8 in confidence? Why am I 7? Why am I 7? Really question yourself, because those be really useful to your interpretation. And then, if I want to get more confident, what do I need to do to get more confident? Go through scenarios in your own mind, and then you can then test those out. In future situations. And then from that, you've got an experiential basis of what's going on. You can read around the literature to boost that up, change it, challenge it. You look to extent to which there are good tools to go along with that. You then look at the studies that have gone along with that. You then look at the methods that studies have used to say, can that really apply? And then from the methods, you then revise all your thinking, reflect on what's going on, and then you start thinking about either doing a study which tests its effectiveness, which every practitioner should be thinking about to some degree, even if it's a case study, to be really rigorous in the methods that evaluate it, and you take it forwards that way. You know, when you said give brief answers, right? And you know I said at the start I was struggling. Can you actually? It's yeah. So sorry about that.
No, it's getting to, it's finding your point, isn't it? It's how you make it as long as you need to get the point across.
I make it as long as it can be.
And then the final point, question I'd like to ask you before we wrap the podcast up is, if anybody had any future questions to ask you in the future, what is the best method for them to get in contact with you via social media?
So you go for Twitter. I'm really into Twitter now. I like tweeting away. And I mean, I say that as a joke, but I think Twitter's great for people in that you sometimes get really good conversations going on. What you really get is, I follow Stuart Biddle, and Nicholas Demanis, who puts out articles, and he goes, and you get his really short summary and a fantastic link. It's like doing my reading for me. But it is, they are selecting a reading list for you all the time. Brilliant. I think it's brilliant. And then you can ask, what did you think about that on Twitter? And then loads of people will jump in and stuff like that. So it's really useful. So they can tweet me, I will tweet back, and then other people will join in. And the nice part is I've done most of my research with co-authors. All of those are on Twitter, so they will all join in as well. Be like one great big academic, practical tweeting loving if they do it.
And what is your Twitter handle?
Andy Lane, 27.
Okay. So.
Which is my age, of course. I have only been 27, 22 times.
Is that the age that you want to be then?
No. It's I set up an Andy Lane 27 Yahoo account as a joke. It's the age before. It's the age pre-children.
Okay.
Life all changes when children occur. So I don't know really. It's an ongoing joke. Greg White is Greg White 27 as well. He's just denying the fact that he's 50 this year. That's him and I went to college together, so I have free reign for jokes about him.
Well, it's good. It's good to be able to take the mickey out of people sometimes.
Wow. You should see his have a look. If anyone wants to look at his professorial talks on YouTube at Liverpool John Moores. John Dickinson, who's his former PhD student, reader at Kent, right, is savaged. Savaged by Greg's jokes in that.
I'll have to have a look at that.
It's funny. Greg's talks are very, very funny, very good.
So, Andy, once again, thanks for coming on the show. And for everybody else, this podcast will be aired every Thursday. So until next week, I will see you then.
Very good. Well done, John.